Good early evening, Marianne Williamson.
Good early evening.
Good early evening.
Wonderful
Thank you.
to me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today to
Thank
talk
you
about
for having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we get into things, I'm just curious. We were speaking a little bit beforehand, and you mentioned kind of going back and forth between like New York and DC. What's your favorite thing about New York City? I have a friend that's trying to convince me to move here. So,
The energy.
yeah.
Always going, always moving. You always feel there's possibility. You always feel anything could happen. People are primed and ready for something new and exciting.
Speaking of primed and ready for something new and exciting, we have this big DNC chair race, which I think for the first time in my entire lifetime, people seem to be really interested in because it's like kind of more behind the scenes thing. You've obviously cast your lot into the ring to run for chair. What do you think is the most important thing the Democratic Party needs to do kind of moving forward?
Transform completely and fundamentally. If we want a new president in 2028, we're going to have to be a new party. We need to throw out the old playbook completely. You know, the reason people aren't usually so interested in the DNC chair race is because if you have a Democratic president or even a Democratic House or Senate, then the DNC gets to be just sort of business in the background. And when you don't have any of those things, the DNC has to take up some space as a kind of spokesperson, I believe. And so when you say, what do we need to do? It's not just what the party needs to do, it's what the party needs to be. I think the party has swayed from its moral core, from its primary mission, from its traditional values of unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. Once it started taking corporate money in the 1970s, we started to be the party that tries to have it both ways. We want to be there to help people, but we'll never go past the point beyond which it would be offending the corporate donors, so that we come across too often as hypocrites, incrementalists. We say one thing, and then end up saying, well, we would have, if only we had had more votes, if only we had had a second term, if only, and we come across weak and hypocritical when we do that. There is nothing about what I just described that carries the energy to even begin to take on Donald Trump. Donald Trump has ushered in an age of political theater, as is obvious. We won't be going back. Whereas the Democratic Party is this old-fashioned playbook. You know, we talk about how, Trump supporters are under the thrall of his personality. I think the Democrats need to break out of a thrall as well. And it's the thrall of this sort of pseudo-sophisticated, almost pseudo-intellectual playbook that really doesn't meet this moment. It's not the zeitgeist. It's not where people are living. And obviously, it's a failure. I think we need to take in as Democrats just how deeply we have failed. And I think that's very relevant to this race. We've lost everything, guys. We've lost House, Senate, White House, and state after state after state. Not only that have become red, it's worse than that. It's how many of them have become supermajorities. In any field of endeavor, you walk into that and go, whoever brought us to this point, they're out. In any endeavor. And yet it's this like, well, we just need to do what we've been doing, but better. No, you need to do something very different because you have to return to some core of your own dedication, ethics, passion, guts, audacity, bravery, telling it like it is, get off your high horse. And the last thing we need to do, and this is what I think is so relevant to this race, everybody's so thinking if only we have a better political car mechanic, that'll fix it. We do need better political car mechanics because clearly we didn't have it coming up to this point. That we all get, but that will not be enough. We have to have a deeper conversation about what road we're on. And that's why it's going to have to be more than all this technical stuff, all the stuff that I agree with. Once again, of course, we have to have a 365-day campaign. Of course, it has to be not just focused on the presidential elections. Of course, it has to be all the way down, granular. Of course, it has to be a situation where it's no longer just this group of people hanging out in Washington with their multi-million-dollar consultancy contracts who know nothing about how to talk to the people in Nebraska, how to talk to the people anywhere outside Washington. All that has to change. But if we don't come up with some adrenaline, some excitement, some theater of our own in the best sense, then nothing's going to really change. And it makes me sad to see anyone still under the thrall that, well, we can do it. We can do it. We just need to do, more counties. Yeah, you think? I don't think.
I do a lot of online debating and arguing over politics and fighting with sometimes people on the left, a lot of the times now people on the right. And one of the frustrations that I express a lot, other people express a lot, is it seems like the right can operate sometimes in a way beyond I'll say beyond accountability. And one of the things that I agree with you and everybody in the Democratic Party right now who's being vocal about the change we need is that we have to do something different going forward. How do we match that conservative energy, or how do we match what they're doing without also losing something important in ourselves?
First of all, I think doing it the same way. We have lost something important within ourselves. So when you talk about doing things the same way, you're just continuing to leak your juice. So I think doing something different is reclaiming ourselves. And how you do it, you bring somebody in there that knows what he's doing, because she's been doing a similar thing for 40 years in terms of knowing how to talk to a crowd. He knows how to dig into an aspect of the American character, one of the lowest aspects of the American character. Why not try somebody who knows how to, because of her skill set, namely mine, that has to do with tapping into inspiration, that has to do with tapping into excitement and the possibility of transformation. Every time somebody talks about, we're going to fight them, we're going to fight them, we're going to fight them, we've lost the fight, okay? That's not how we're going to win, because they're shameless. It's not a fair fight. We're going to win by exciting people, by inspiring people to what is essentially not just the traditional core of the Democratic Party, but the basic core of the American ideal, which is that this should be a society in which everyone has a chance to thrive, and that we have to get back. It's not when you say, how do we not lose? What is it we're afraid of losing here? We need to be more honest with ourselves, brutally self-aware than that. We need to get back to the core that we were given by God inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How can you pursue happiness when you have to work 3 jobs? At least one of them you hate. People at jobs that they don't even like, but it's the only way they can get health care. We're the only advanced nation in this world that does not have universal health care. Until the 60s and 70s, we had tuition-free college and tech school in Florida, California, Texas. During the 1970s, the average couple could afford a house. Today, how unattainable that seems to people. Well, no, we have to reclaim some things. And I would argue that only by throwing out this old playbook, only by disenthralling ourselves of this pseudo-sophisticated, pseudo-intellectual, technocratic, rationalistic thing that speaks to no one, that it's just kind of not where people live in our hearts.
So something that I've had a lot of trouble dealing with, and I'm curious how you would figure this out, is when I hear people complaining about things. So we'll take college and healthcare are 2 big ones, right? Everybody in my generation and the generation after me and the generation before me still complains about student loan debt, right? Lingering debt, stuff you still have to pay back, the unaffordability or unattainability of college sometimes, and then stuff related to healthcare. So these are 2 things that I think most Americans care a lot about. In 2017, the first thing the Republicans tried to do when they came in was repeal and replace the ACA.
Yeah.
Or look at Donald Trump now, and he's saying, we want to abolish the entire Department of Education, and we're going to do everything we can to block people who are trying to do student loan forgiveness. If these are the things that the American public wants, which I do agree with, it's a challenging question. if these are the things that they want, these are the things they want, why is Trump able to message on this so effectively when all of his actions are exactly to the contrary? That he's going to extend the tax cuts for the billionaires, do nothing for healthcare and education, yeah?
My experience leads me to believe, because economics overrides all of that. I have met so many people. I'll give you an example, a man I met the other day. But this is something I've heard in so many places. Very nice man. He was the doorman at a hotel in Detroit where we did the forum, the Midwest Forum. And we were talking, and he said, you know, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Washington. He said, are you going for the inauguration? I said, well, I'm not a Republican, but I live there. And I said, did you vote for him? And he said, well, I didn't vote because I haven't changed my registration yet from Chicago, where I used to live. And he had said something else that made me ask him. I said, but would you have voted for him? And he said, yes, I would have voted for him. And I said to him something that I've said before to people who are these like really nice, good people. I said, doesn't it bother you what a bad guy he is? Doesn't it like bother you what a liar he is? Now, time after time after time, I don't get, no, he's not. People aren't stupid, is what he said. Let me answer it this way. When I lived in Chicago, I was a doorman and I had a limo company. I made over $100,000 a year, and my wife did not have to work, and we raised 3 great kids. Now I am in Michigan. My wife works. We're both working, and we can't come close. And then he went into this detailed description of what steaks used to cost, down to the cent, and what the change was. We're talking about people for whom healthcare, we're just talking about food. And I said to him, do you think Trump is going to fix that? And he said, and once again, this is over and over and over again, I've had this basic scenario, and he looked at me, he said, I said, you're hoping that he will. He went, I said, so you're saying that even though you don't see how he is, you have some hope that he will, whereas staying the course, you have no hope. And he said, yes. And I think people will go with false hope before they'll go for no hope. And I think it's economics, economics, economics. And I think, you know, I remember at the beginning of the campaign, and I was just saying this as loud as I could, when the Democratic line was the economy is doing well. For who? Take a drive just a few miles out of your neighborhood, you geniuses who come up with such a line. Because people are selling their blood plasma. Their blood plasma in order to pay their rent. One woman was saying to me one day, because we have 1.3 million people who are rationing their insulin. And one woman was saying to me, it was out west somewhere, she said, well, I had to decide my insulin or the rent. But I figured ultimately that even if to buy the insulin meant I was going to have to tell the girls that we were going to have to move out of the apartment and live in the car for a while. But I figured at least they'd have a mother. Excuse me. These are millions of people going through these scenarios every single day in this country. So Bernie and Trump in 2016 at least had the smarts to acknowledge that. And Bernie actually meant it. Trump is shrewd. Trump is very shrewd and psychologically 1,000 times more astute than we have been.
What do you think, as the DNC chair, your biggest prime directives would be in terms of kind of steering from initially from the front and then hopefully behind the scenes in 2026 as we sweep through and win the House and the Senate, ideally? But what do you think is like the most important thing that you can do there to steer the Democratic Party in a good direction? Well,
first of all, we need a far better ground game. But we all know what that ground game needs to be. I think we have in Ken Martin somebody who is not only able to do that, but deeply ethical. The ethical corruption of the party is a serious problem. So I believe that he's the answer to that. So that is, there really needs to be almost a co-chairman type situation here, which is what Clinton did in 1995 with Don Fowler and Chris Dodd. There was a national chairman and a general chairman. One to be the main messenger of what this party stands for, the other to be in charge of the ground game. But that ground game will not be enough. Not enough to fix your car. Somebody's got to talk about where are we driving? So for that, we need to create an entire process that has to do with visualizing for people and enrolling people into the vision of an America in which we are as audacious as Donald Trump is. I think people are very attracted to that audacity, and sometimes for good reason, actually. He says what he wants, and that's what we're going to make happen. Democrats have to become like that. 5 years from now, every American will have health care. 5 years from now, every American will have a roof. 5 years from now, every American can live and support a family on one job. 5 years from now, serious climate change mitigation. 5 years from now, people can breathe freely and feel that this is a space where they can spread their wings and soar. That's the American dream. We need to claim it. So number one, my job, if elected, to paint that vision for people and enroll them in that vision and make politics kind of hot and sexy again. I remember around the country, I've said so many times, I've said, this is what I want. I want for women or men, whomever, to feel, you would say to your partner, I'm going to a city council meeting on Thursday. You want to go with me? That this is the cool thing to do. This is what the right wing has done. They have created a cohesive vision, a story that people can feel my story relates to that story. People are not just looking to what MAGA is offering, thinking, I like the policy. Because like you said, if they take a rational look at it, what are you talking about? Although, once again, psychology is not woo-woo. The part of the brain that rationally analyzes an issue is not the same part of the brain that decides who to vote for. We always have them on the issues. Democratic politicians have been saying to me for years, we had them on the issues. The issues are not always the issue. The issue is, and it takes, I'm sorry, this is just as serious a skill set as the ground game. The air game is as important. The Air Force is as important as the Army, right? Mm-hmm. So the air game has to do with creating some of our own media. Media, once again, one of the things that's going to happen when you get the power and the money out of this consultancy class in Washington and just a few consultancy firms who have no clue how to talk to people in Kansas or how to talk to people in Florida or how to talk to people in Oregon or whatever, is you start working much more deeply with these state parties. Now, other candidates are certainly talking about how we have to have much more power in the hands of the state parties. But we need to not only give them more money, what I would do as chairman is deeply listen. There is so much talent in the membership of the DNC. Like when you're talking to people, God, these people, I can't tell you how many DNC members and chairmen and people out there in America have said, you know how often I've received a phone call from the DNC leadership? 0. I would listen. And then that's, I'm a writer. I'm a storyteller. I'm somebody who works counseling with individuals and organizations in transformation. We need to transform. It begins with listening to people and then understanding the sort of organic calling of what is the messaging. And people hear you on the level that you speak from. And then we have to say, okay, he has a Project 2025, we have a Project 2028. And that has to do with healthcare. And you say it every hour of every day. This is what we are going to do to improve your lives. And we all know what's happened here. The Democratic Party has shown up right before an election, right? And then they go into their wood-paneled rooms and they come back before the next election to ask for more money and votes. Those days have got to be over. No matter who is going to be chair, I think those days will be over. It's such an obvious, obsolete paradigm. But we have to do more than that. We have to talk to people on the level of deep soulfulness and audacity and values and realness. And if we speak from that place within ourselves, people will hear us from that place. And as chair, I think my ability to do that would be central to that effort.
One of the things that I've appreciated about the Democratic Party, establishment, politics, whatever you want to call it, the left, is, especially as I've gotten older, my background is in video games. Growing up when I was like 13, 14, 15, it's basically 99% white guys that are online playing games. It's basically everything. And as the industry has evolved and more people have gotten online, the places have grown a lot more diverse. And not diverse in just that, like, oh, we're like hitting a quota, but there's generally like so many more cool people to play with. We've gotten the opportunity to play with, or do content with, or do engagement with in other ways. I had an interesting question posed to me by an audience member, and I kind of wonder this sometimes. Do you ever think that it's difficult to manage because the tent has become so big that when I look at the Republican messaging, they can just, Donald Trump will do the shithole countries and we need to close all the borders and we need to do all of this. And then when we do our messaging from the left, whenever we message on things like we have an issue with men in college right now, but we also really want women to succeed. And we have an issue with young white men feeling alienated, but we also want to message to like other groups of people. Like, is there ever like too many, balls in the air sometimes? Or how do the Democrats juggle that? Because it feels like the tent is so big, it's hard to keep everybody together sometimes. Yeah.
This is the self-delusion of the Democratic Party today,
Okay.
that anybody thinks that our tent is really big. Our tent is shrinking. And the way the DNC and others within the establishment of the Democratic Party have acted, it's almost as though they were intentionally trying to shrink it. You don't build a movement by saying, we'll build an alliance with them over there, and we'll build an alliance with them over there, and we'll build an alliance with them over there. The I Ching says even thieves have alliances. So we kid ourselves that we're the people who have so many ideas. Have you been to a Republican dinner party recently? There are all kinds of people there, and they're yelling and they're screaming and they're having a good time. They just know they want to win. And they have their story and they're sticking to it. But it's almost more open. I mean, now with all the Bobby Kennedy crowd and the all these, crunchy, holistic moms are sitting next to the guy eating a McDonald's, and she walks in and he says, "Hi, how you doing?" He's like happy to have her there. So the Democrats like to think of ourselves as the welcoming guys. No, we're not necessarily. And I've seen that certainly with, oh, she's too woo-woo. What? You're not really a Democrat. What? Who gets to say? Or you're not qualified. Someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, they treat him like, you got an idea? Come on in. Whereas here we're holding it. So this is an aspect that has to be completely dismantled in our own cult-like behavior. We say they're enthralled. Lincoln said we have to disenthrall ourselves. It's a very superficial level of, okay, we've got blacks over here, and we've got Arabs over here, and we've got the women over here, and then really, because what are you delivering for any of them? And we'll virtue signal so the pro-Palestinian people like us, or we'll virtue signal so the Jews will like us, and we'll virtue signal so the blacks like us. Meanwhile, nobody's stupid. What have you done for me is what people are, the cry of the soul from all these groups. So what should be our unifying force? Values. Values that every person in this country should have a chance to thrive. That no one owns this country. No one has a monopoly on truth. Everybody should be able to feel that they can have their say. We shouldn't all have to agree with each other about everything. See, that's what the Republicans have on us. They don't feel like you have to agree with me. We know we're going to show up on election day. But our unifying thread is what we have lost our own alignment with, which is that unequivocal advocacy for everyone. I think we talk about how, the right has separated us. Look at all the ways we've separated ourselves by this group - American, this group - American, this group - American. I think we need to talk about the American in us. Some of us are white, some of us are black, some of us are brown, some of us are Jewish, some of us are Hindu, some of us are Muslim. It's e pluribus unum here, guys. Out of many, one. And so if we reclaim, and I think that a part of what politics should be is educative. We need to go back. I'm romantic about American history and American democracy. We have to stand on the Declaration of Independence. It's not just that we stand up, let's say, for LGBTQ or trans, let's say. It's not just that we stand up for trans youth. It's why we stand up for trans youth. Because all men are created equal. Because we are one nation predicated, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the idea that all men are created equal. It's our values that we're standing on. And that's why we stand on health care. And that's why we stand on economic justice. And that's why we stand on safety in the workplace. And that's why we stand on unions. It can't just be from up here. It's got to be from here. It's got to be from here. And when we get back to that, there's a famous story. When FDR died, his train was bringing the body back from Warm Springs, Georgia, right? And there's a famous photograph of this young black man that I think was I think he was in the Army, maybe. I'm not sure. It's a famous photograph. You've probably seen it. And he's watching the train, and he has these tears streaking down his cheeks. And someone said to him, "Oh, did you know the president?" And he responded, "No, but he knew me." And I think a lot of that had to do with his experience of polio. Because, Roosevelt was tall, dark, handsome, and a Roosevelt. He had everything. And that polio took him down all the way to the floor. He goes to Warm Springs, Georgia, and people that he probably would have never noticed, that he would never even had any contact with. He's the fancy New Yorker. Just saw him as another sufferer. They weren't really sure what it meant that he was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they helped him. And he went through such a profound personal transformation. And if he had not, I don't think he would have been the man that we needed him to be, the president we needed him to be, to understand the suffering of people during the Great Depression and then to create the New Deal. That kind of transformation, where it's not just about this anymore, it's about this, it's about this. When we reclaim that, you don't have to go get people. They'll be rushing to ask, where do I register?
Who do you think was the last great communicator in the Democratic Party? And then who are a couple today that you think are really good communicators?
Well, I was excited about Obama in 2008. In his campaign in 2008, it was quite extraordinary. We now know how much of that was because of speeches that were written by John Favreau, right? Because when he got into office, you could tell almost immediately that the man we had voted for, the man we thought we were voting for, and that I think we gave him the mandate to be, was not who he was or how he communicated after he won. To a great extent, anyway. So to me, the last high point of Democratic communication was the campaign in 2008.
Gotcha. Do you see anybody today in the Democratic Party that you feel like this person is a really great communicator? Besides yourself, of course. And I know you're fond of Bernie. Do you think anybody else, like some people say Gavin Newsom, like has that energy?
Gavin Newsom's going to have a hard time now going forward.
Because of the wildfires? Okay.
I like Pritzker.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I like Pritzker. Because I think he, because of his own, he has obviously some personal addiction issues, and you can feel I know he's a very, very wealthy man, he's a billionaire, but you can also feel a soulfulness that I think probably is connected in large part to some human suffering he's probably been through despite that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of the things you spoke about initially was the importance of like economic issues and kitchen table issues, people say this. But then you also speak a lot about kind of this narrative, the more emotional side that we have to fight on. How do you separate out, as we decide as Democrats what we respond to in the media, how do you figure out what the important fights are to have when it feels like so much of the conservative messaging sometimes is hitting us on like social issues and we might just want to talk about economic issues? How do you parse what to respond to and what not to?
We shouldn't parse it. Trump doesn't. You don't. You stand on your values and you speak to the moment. You speak to the moment. And a large part of that, in terms of what you're saying, has to do with what he does and what the House does and what the Senate does and what the state legislators do over the next 2 and 4 years. That's my problem, actually, with this race. Everybody's talking like we're in a vacuum. No, we're not in a vacuum. We have a political phenomenon on our hands here, a unique, a peculiar, and a dangerous political phenomenon. And he has created an adrenaline rush that just moves through the electorate. We have to have that. So every day, I don't know, what do you talk about today? Well, how do we decide what to talk about? I don't know. One day it should probably be Greenland. Another day it should probably be Panama. Another day it should probably be Canada. Another day it should probably be what Musk and Ramaswamy are doing. Another day it might be about that, and it should be every day about those tax cuts and how, okay, this is great, guys. This is really rich. So Ramaswamy and Musk are going to come in and they're going to be efficient, right? See, I think good is more important than efficient. You don't feed a hungry child because it's efficient. You feed a hungry child because it's good. You don't take care of your elderly because it's efficient. You take care of your elderly because it's good. We can't be great if we're not good. But they're saying, oh, but it's important because they're going to cut the fat out and maybe $2 trillion from the budget. Okay, great. Now Musk is saying, well, maybe one. Meanwhile, those tax cuts, that 2017 tax cut that he wants to extend, will add $4 trillion to the next 10 years. So it's all smoke and mirrors. So what do we talk about? I don't know what's happening. Like, there's not enough happening on any given day. That's the problem with the Democratic Party. They're over in a room somewhere deciding what to talk about. Meanwhile, people are hungry. People don't have health care. What you should talk about is what people are going through in this country and what the Democrats are going to do for you every single day. It could be a story about a single mother who works at Walmart and what Walmart is doing. It could be that. On another given day, it could be about the fact that there are millions of American children who go to school in places where they don't even have the adequate resources to teach a child to read. And if that child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, chances for high school graduation are drastically decreased. Chances for incarceration are drastically increased. Another day, maybe we should talk about the fact that 1 in 4 Americans have medical debt. Over half of our bankruptcies are medical bankruptcies. The fact that 1.3 million people ration their insulin. This isn't, to me, something you strategize. This is something you just open your heart, open your gut, and speak. That's what people can't stand about Democrats. And that's what they actually like about Trump. So much so that even when it's a lie, it's like, yeah, well.
One of the big challenges that I saw, and I actually fell victim to this even, from 2017 to 2021 was on the conservative side. My impression is the conservatives are shameless. They will talk about whatever they want to. Yeah. It's whatever they feel benefits them. That's what they're going to talk about. All of the kind of, they call themselves centrists, but all of these people who are kind of in the middle all also seem to carry a lot of water for conservatives. And then it felt like on the left, whenever you were trying to fight against Donald Trump or some of the horrible stuff that his administration was trying to do, you would get hit with this Trump derangement syndrome accusation, where if you focus too much on the fact that they said they were going to cut spending, well, here's the deficit, or Trump horribly mismanaged COVID, like where was the communication or the coordination between the states? How it feels like, and now that you have Elon Musk, who's Trump's personal best friend, who now has a guest room in Mar-a-Lago and maybe in the White House coming up, owns a whole social media platform. Where do Democrats find their footing to start fighting back, to start saying, like, these are the things I'm going to point out? Yeah.
That's an old-fashioned conversation.
Okay.
Got to be guerrilla. Got to be guerrilla. You can't sit in a room and try to decide how to do that. Got to be guerrilla. Got to be on the move. Interestingly enough, and by the way, during this last campaign, I remember I was on, I think it was Piers Morgan, and I was asked, what would be your advice to Kamala Harris? I said, stop talking about Donald Trump. People know who he is now. People know who he is now. There's nothing you can say, but what I learned, like I said before, was how many people, they weren't denying his character. They were just feeling, well, maybe it could help me. Even though, like you said, it's not going to, they'll be seeing that. They'll be seeing that soon enough. The issue is, will we be ready? Now, when you say, how do you parse that? Like I said, you got to be guerrilla. One of the things, it seems to me, about Republicans, more of them come from the private sector. In the private sector, you know that if your business is going down on Tuesday, you better fix it by Thursday. Because if you don't fix it by Thursday, this whole thing could go under by Sunday. okay? They know how to pivot. Democrats are acting because too many of them, their contracts, their power is going to be the same no matter who's in office. I saw that during this campaign. I thought, you'd really rather see Trump win than give me a shot, wouldn't you? Because it's their perch, right? So the way Democrats who often act is the business is going down on Monday. We're going to continue doing what we do on Wednesday. And even if it goes under on Saturday, they're still in this race talking about basically doing the same, but doing it better on Monday. You gotta be guerrilla. Democrats, you know how the story of the Revolutionary War, right? And the British came over in their red coats, and they're lined up, right, with their muskets, fire, the old-fashioned, right, type of warfare. Whereas the colonists had been around the Native American Indians. They knew about hiding behind trees. This is also one of the reasons we lost in Vietnam. We just have to become guerrilla political warriors. It's like, you just kind of gotta go. I don't know what's happening this hour. You can't sit and parse anything. It's a 360-degree in the round assault on democracy. And we won't be able to defeat that through playing whack-a-mole. We've got to have a central core so that every time we say anything, people will know why, because that's against our values, and we need to say so. Because if all men are created equal, you can't treat that group that way. And also, in the world today, to make the point that all men are created equal doesn't just mean Americans either.
What do you think Donald Trump represents, and what do you think he represents to his followers? Do you think that's the same thing or two different things?
Okay, so let's go back. Franklin Roosevelt said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivered on its promises. Somewhere around the 70s, Democrats stopped making delivering on democracy's promises the bottom line. It was the bottom line as long as it didn't offend the donor base. Okay? Even the most rudimentary understanding of history, and large groups of desperate people, and 70% of Americans living with chronic economic despair is a large group of desperate people. Anywhere in the world, any time in history, large groups of desperate people form a petri dish out of which all manner of both personal and societal dysfunction almost inevitable, including ideological capture by psychotic forces and almost always the political strongman. What geniuses didn't bother to even think about this? If it had not been Donald Trump, it would have been someone else. We created a great big hole. People living just in survival. I mean, like that man telling me in such detail about what steaks cost when he could afford them.
Do you think that
now
you
add to that? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, because you mentioned the what sounds like voters who were either in the center or switched from Democrat to Republican, like people that aren't fans of Trump's character, but are just looking for some sort of hope. Maybe. Yeah, a maybe is better than an absolutely no.
Maybe.
Do you think that represents the core or average Trump voter, or were these the group of people that put him over the edge?
There are many things going on here. And once again, I don't have a magnifying glass, but I have what you can see from the outside. I'm not in any way underscoring the fact that there are white nationalists out there, the fact that there are the Proud Boys out there, the fact that there are Christian, white supremacist Christian nationalists. This is really scary stuff. So he has done enough, bird whistles. He knows how to attract anybody. He'll look at anybody. He'll say, "Oh, I need the kids." Okay, I like TikTok. I like TikTok. Any group, he knows how to get you. There's a woman, Barbara. Is it Corcoran? Is that how you pronounce it? She's a big real estate mogul here.
Okay.
So I heard her on a video, and she said, "I know Donald Trump." She said, "I've known him for many years. Our real estate companies began roughly at the same time." She said, "I've spent hours in meetings with Donald Trump." She said, "I know what he does." She said, "He has an eerie ability. He will go into a room, and he has an eerie ability to know where you're vulnerable in order to make that sale. So the woman who was interviewing her said, "Oh, so you're saying he's a master salesman?" She said, "No, I'm not saying he's a master salesman. I'm saying he's an eerie phenomenon. And what he had done in those meetings is what he has done to this country." He's completely amoral. So if it's the Proud Boys, I could get them by talking a certain way. You know, there was a Rolling Stone interview, I think, with Jared Kushner that I read shortly after Trump's win in 2016, where Kushner said, he said he was sitting in a McDonald's with his father-in-law. And he looked around and he said to Donald Trump, "There are a lot of angry people out there. We could harness all that and make you president." Now, the way I look at it is there are all those loving, decent, good, intelligent people out there. We could harness all that and change the world. One of the things that running for president twice has convinced me, the problem is not with the American people. We're good and decent people. I'm not saying we're better than anyone else, but we're not worse either. The problem is not the consciousness of the American people. The problem is a political system that acts like a lid, acts like a suppressant, when if we just allowed for the genuine, organic unfolding of what should be democracy and the real voices of people, this country would be fine. And that is what the Democratic Party must become again, a real conduit for that.
One of the things I noticed about the Republican side of things is they seem to be wholly coordinated or at least consistent in all of their messaging from the top down. Like if I see a guy online saying something, I know that Trump probably just said it or Vivek said it, or like I know it's all the same. One of the things that you speak about in being the DNC chair is kind of empowering the individual state parties to kind of like take the reins on things. How much, I guess, like coordination do you see the DNC chair is having or the Democratic Party having with the other states versus just kind of like setting them loose and saying good luck? How do you see that role, like those competing forces?
Having run for president, particularly this time, I lived at the effect of the behavioral patterns of the DNC. So I had a natural curiosity about a lot of that. Since running, the political malpractice is so deep. Nobody's even tried. What you're saying is that there's a cohesion, that every school board election, every local election, every city council, every media, every state election, they're there with their messaging. We haven't even tried. We're talking about a few consultancy groups who come up with pamphlets to be handed out 3 weeks before an election. We don't have a cohesion. We don't have a cohesive story. So when you say how much should that be the work of the DNC chair, given how little there is, huge. That's why you have to have someone basically in charge of the ground game. Because ground game is important. And like I already mentioned, we have someone who totally knows how to do that, I believe, very well. Plus, he's an ethical and honorable man, I know from having run. But that, what you're talking about now, is going to need, it necessitates, I believe, someone who knows about communication and knows how to bring together. You know, I was reading an article. It was an interview with some major CEO, some big Fortune 500 company. He said 20 years ago, we were looking for people who understood the digital space. Today, we're looking for storytellers. Isn't that interesting? To weave a story. And that's what needs to happen, because it's exactly what you say. They have a story. Now, we actually, our story, if you could look throughout history, one of the grandest stories is the United States of America. We had 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. That document posited principles of possibility, human possibility, as deeply spiritual as political, that all men are created equal, that all have the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted to secure those rights, and if it's not happening, the people have the right to alter it or abolish it. With that, possibility was open that had never existed on the planet. 56 signers. But 41 of them were slave owners. That dichotomy has been with us from the inception. It's baked into the cake. We are both and have been, that struggle has been reiterated in every generation. We have been the best that humanity has to offer, and we at times have been the worst humanity has to offer. Now, if you realize that every generation has reiterated the struggle, some more dramatically than others, then you look at the overall arc of history and you go, but we've done well. We had slavery, but then we had the abolitionists. We had the institutionalized suppression of women, but then we had the women's suffragist movement, the passage of the 19th Amendment. We had the Gilded Age, and then we had the establishment of organized labor. We had segregation, and then we had the civil rights movement. It's our turn now. It's no different. There have always been in this country people whose hearts really got, this is important. This is important. This is bigger than my life, this is serving the ages stuff. This is big. And there have been people in every generation, including ours, who for their own ideological and or financial purposes find democracy kind of inconvenient to their purposes and have proven time and time again they will do whatever it takes to make sure that those principles are not actualized. Even Thomas Jefferson said, it is the general tendency of the rich to prey upon the poor. So now today it's not a specific institution like slavery. It's an economic paradigm. It's the very idea that short-term profits for this matrix of corporate powers, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food, big ag, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, banks, financial institutions, tech in some cases, big oil and defense contractors, their profits supersede democracy at this point. And that's going to only get worse with Trump and Musk. And it's our turn to push back. Let's not be the first generation in American history to ultimately wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. What bigger story can you get than the story I just said? And that, to me, it's like when Franklin Roosevelt talked about the economic royalists. That would be the corporatists of today. They came after him. They called him socialist and so forth. What he said was, I welcome their hatred. That's who we have to become again. And then we'll win because people will know that we mean it. And until we do mean it.
When we consider kind of the more boring, I guess, logistics questions, one of the things I look at is on the Republican side. So you do have this cabinet of, I don't know if we're at 7 or 8 billionaire people now. You've got Americans simultaneously frustrated with media control, and then you have Elon Musk, or frustrated with pharmaceuticals, and you've got Vivek Ramaswamy, disappointed in housing or education. You've got Donald Trump. Do you think that, or not do you think it's a mistake, how does the Democratic Party fund itself if they were to take the steps to start aggressively cutting off every single source of corporate money, even if that money might come with no strings attached or there's an alignment in vision? Like, do you think that might be taking like an even further step back where you're putting yourself in an unwinnable position? Or how do you replace that money? Or is that not important? Or what do you think?
The gold in today's currency is human relationships. Hillary Clinton had a whole lot more money than Donald Trump did. Look at all the money that Kamala Harris had. And look at the absurd expenditures. And Bernie Sanders already proved how much money you can make in small donations when people care. We are trading with, it's whoredom. You want that money so badly that you're willing to sacrifice your values, you're willing to sacrifice your own ethics. You do that, and your own democracy, by once again, suppressing primaries, kicking people off ballots. What did that money do for you? It just made people, with every dollar you spend, it made people, the smell. So I believe that when we do the right thing, the money will come. The money will be there. Money will be there in small donations.
What do you think sets you apart from everybody else running for chair that you would want the other DNC voters to keep in mind when they go to cast their ballot?
Well, there's some good people.
There are.
And there are some good people running. I believe, however, that I represent a fundamental change, not incremental change. As I said before, the problem is that not that we don't have political car mechanics. The problem is we're on the wrong road. That's another line from Roosevelt that I love. He was talking about the presidency. He said, the main job of the presidency, he said, is not administrative, but moral leadership. We need to return to the prophetic voice of justice. Justice, justice, thou shalt pursue. That was the prophetic voice of the Democratic Party. When you don't stand in the light, the darkness is going to overwhelm you. And so I think there's a lot of talent, and some of which, were I to be chair, I would definitely tap into, as there's tremendous talent throughout the membership. But I believe that we need to lead at this point. First of all, that's very common in business, that when you really need to transform, I mean, you can ask any consultant in transforming businesses. The consultant comes in and says, is this fixable or is this not fixable? Any consultant would come in and say, this isn't fixable. This is on such a level of failure. The only option now is transformation. That is your fix. It's beyond fix. It's transforming. And, I'm not the greatest visionary in the United States, but I think I'm the only one running for DNC chair. If you want excitement, if you want adrenaline, if you want authenticity, if you want audacity, if you want somebody who can really talk to people where they live, and that person knows that I understand because I've been on those streets up close and personal with people for years, that would be me. Uh-huh. When my career began, I was very involved with the AIDS crisis. And then because of that, I was very up close and personal with people in some of their darkest moments. The joke used to be, nobody calls Marianne because things are going well. I was always the person you called after sometimes the worst news. But in the 1980s and most of the 1990s, my experience of people whose lives were really in trouble, for the most part, was people for whom the crisis was the exception. It wasn't the rule. What I began to realize in the late 90s, around the year 2000, more and more people who I would meet for whom the crisis was the rule and not the exception. It wasn't just that they had cancer, it's that they didn't have health care. It wasn't just that they couldn't find a job, it's they couldn't live on just one. And that's when I began to realize no amount of private charity can compensate for this, as important as that space is and where I've been very active. I think after as many years as I've had being with people in their most agonizing hours, I think it reads when I'm with people in situations where I would like them to know the Democratic Party is fighting for you. And they're not going to believe it from the messaging as it is now. One young man said to me last night, he said, I went door to door during this last session. He's in Illinois. And he said, and I was, presenting this sheet of what Kamala's policies were. And he said, I would show the sheet to someone, and it wasn't that they said, I don't like any of those things. They said, I don't think she'd do any of that.
It's loosely related. I did a YouTube show where it was called Street Epistemology. You'd be oppositional to a Trump voter, and we had whiteboards, and we had to write down why we think the other guy wouldn't vote for. I think this was 2021, so it was over Biden versus Trump, and he had 3 guesses for mine, and I had 3 guesses for his. And I'm a pretty smart guy, and I talked to a lot of people. I was like, I got this, no problem. And I think I wish I could remember exactly what I'd written, but for why he wouldn't vote for Biden, I was like, probably wouldn't do enough on the border, probably wouldn't do enough on. It was. I'm a Democrat, so it was 3 policy positions, and then he guessed mine, and I don't even remember what he said, but he was right on like the second one he had it. It's like, okay, yeah. And when I read down mine, I was wrong on all of his. I was like, what's the thing that's keeping you here? And he said, I think Biden is senile.
I'm sorry?
He said, I think Biden is senile, and I was like, oh. And sometimes, yeah, there are moments where it's like, okay, my brain is very off here, I guess, in how we're viewing. Not to say whether he was right or wrong, or not to say anything else, but just sometimes the perspective that we view the elections from are the important issues. You know, like you said, like sometimes people will assume people are voting for Trump because of these policy reasons, and it's like people oftentimes aren't powered by that.
Like I said, the part of the brain that rationally analyzes an issue isn't the same part of the brain that decides who to vote for, which is why primaries are important. Because if you have debates, everybody gets to see all the candidates and get a feel for them and get to know them.
If you did win the chair position, or for whoever does win the chair position, do you think that there's going to be a lot of pushback from other parts of the Democrat apparatus in moving the party? Like, do you see the media fighting it, the state parties fighting it? How do you view that going forward?
If I may say so, that's why it should be me, because it's going to take one tough broad to know what they're doing and be able to push back. Most of the people that I've heard talk, I feel they underestimate those forces. But because I've run twice, I know them. I know how they act. I know the deep level of, they don't even care they don't care who wins as long as it's not me, because they know, we'll get him. We'll go around him, we'll be fine. He's either one of us, as in one case, or we can get around that. We can put him in a corral and make sure he doesn't really mess with anything.
Final question from my perspective. I have an audience of who are considered, I guess, like the dispossessed of the Democratic Party, so younger white men, basically. What do you think?
We're women, and we're dispossessed too.
Sure. Okay.
We're homeless too.
Sure, yeah. Do you think that there's anything in particular that the Democratic Party can do to kind of like win some of these people back? Like in particular, do you think it's just the broad message narrative?
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, and you'll understand this based on everything I've said, I don't think things like, what could I do to win them back? That's the kind of language that doesn't even reside in my heart. My heart is, where have we failed them? Okay? Because if you stop failing people, they'll be yours again, right? Where have we failed men? I think we're all male, we're all female within our, psyche, et cetera. But I believe that economic opportunity is so important for a human being to feel agency and to feel the capacity to produce. And I believe that when you fail to provide economic opportunity for people that can make them feel dignified and that they can support their loved ones, I think it does damage to people. You have some trade deal, and then you're going to have boarded up factories, and people can't find jobs there anymore. Men who have told me, my wife won't respect me, my kids won't respect me. I've seen damage done to people's psyche. It's more than financial. And so I believe for women, but for men, for anyone, however we identify sexually today, I think that that's a primary cause of, I will go anywhere, I will do anything, and I will listen to even somebody I know is a total whatever he is, if it can make me feel I can stand up straight again and live a life of purpose.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Do you have any final thoughts or messages, or where can people find you if you're trying to get people to follow you on one platform?
Yeah, if somebody's interested, I am at Marianne 4 DNC, Marianne numeral 4 DNC.com, and would appreciate your support and my social media and stuff.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining me on your YouTube channel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool.